Most cases begin with a crime scene, a witness, or a frantic 911 call. But this one began with silence. The kind of silence that settles over a home where something is deeply wrong, where a child should be breathing, moving, crying, but isn't. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. On September 3, 2025, Michigan first responders arrived at a modest home after a call about an unresponsive toddler. 2-year-old Riley Lavon Hurley Whitehead was found inside. At first glance, nothing made sense. There were no bruises, no clear signs of trauma. Just a tiny girl who wasn't breathing, and a mother who seemed oddly still. That mother was 27-year-old Irene Whitehead. Paramedics worked frantically, but Riley was pronounced dead shortly after. The shock of a child's death always shakes a community. But what made this case different was how quickly things around Irene began to feel off. Detectives usually expect tears, panic, confusion. But Irene's calmness created a strange tension in the room. Not grief, not guilt, something else they couldn't name yet. Still, without obvious injuries, the case stalled right at the starting line. The medical examiner examined Riley's body. Toxicology was conducted. They checked for illness, internal trauma, congenital issues. In the end, the report came back with the 2 words investigators hate most. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. That single line froze the entire investigation. Without a cause or manner, prosecutors couldn't charge anyone, and detectives had almost nothing to stand on. Or so they thought. Over the next 3 months, quiet pieces of information began to surface. A hospital record here, a digital footprint there, a family interview that didn't sit right. And the more they found, the more Riley's death looked less like a tragic medical event, and more like something nobody wanted to imagine. What cracked the investigation open wasn't forensic evidence. It was digital evidence. Investigators learned that Irene had been in communication with her own mother shortly before Riley's death. In those exchanges, she expressed severe mental exhaustion and made statements indicating she wished she didn't have the children, showing proof of an environment where something was deeply wrong. From there, investigators began quietly combing through technological evidence. Phone records, browser activity, messages, emails, anything that could provide context. Most searches brought up nothing unusual. Random browsing, recipes, social media, daily life. Then, 5 days after Riley's death, a new search appeared. One line, one question, the one that changed everything. How hard is it to prove if the cause of death is suffocation by bag in toddler? Investigators stared at the line, realizing what it meant. Not speculation, not curiosity, intent. It didn't prove murder on its own, but it showed knowledge, awareness. And it was impossible to explain away as innocent. The search was traced directly back to Irene. Investigators confronted her with it. She didn't deny the search. She didn't claim someone else did it. She admitted it was hers. That admission shifted the case from undetermined death to a working theory of homicide. Detectives now started forming timelines, comparing Riley's medical history with the statements the mother had made over the years. Old hospital visits suddenly made sense in ways that weren't obvious before. Riley had been brought to the hospital multiple times for what Irene described as breathing episodes. Incidents with no clear medical explanation. Each time, doctors struggled to find a cause. Each time, Riley stabilized after a brief stay and was sent home. Now detectives were wondering, were these episodes accidents or practice? The subtle pattern repeated itself. Riley only had breathing issues around her mother, and the incidents always unfolded in the same way. This was the kind of pattern that doesn't look suspicious until someone dies. Investigators also learned something else. Irene had been the sole adult present during every one of those medical emergencies. Still, police needed more than patterns and suspicions. They needed Irene to talk. Detectives planned a strategic interview. Not aggressive, not accusatory, just slow, methodical questioning designed to uncover inconsistencies. They waited for the right moment, Thanksgiving Day 2025, when Irene might be more emotionally vulnerable. When she arrived for questioning, she didn't seem nervous. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't show distress. As questioning began, detectives asked simple background details. Irene answered calmly. They asked about Riley's medical history. Again, no hesitation. They asked where she was in the home on the day Riley died. Her answers remained flat and rehearsed. But once detectives brought up the search history, the suffocation question, her demeanor shifted. Tiny movements, hands clasping, breathing uneven, a jaw tightening. Detectives asked bluntly why she searched for suffocation in toddlers. She didn't deny it, but her explanation didn't match her body language. They pushed harder. Then they asked the question they had waited months to ask. Why did you put a bag over Riley's mouth? For the first time, Irene broke. Not with tears, not with shock, but with a confession that forced even seasoned investigators to pause. I just wanted it to stop. Detectives leaned in, letting the silence force her to keep talking. She continued, I thought if she was gone, it would all stop. That she wouldn't be here anymore. That she'd die. The room went still. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Detectives asked again, this time more bluntly, stripping away ambiguity. What were you thinking would happen when you covered her mouth? And Irene whispered the words that ended all doubt. I killed her. It was the statement investigators had suspected for months, but hearing it was something else entirely. Still, the interview wasn't over, because Irene said something else, something that wasn't in any expectation, any prediction, any investigative plan. She claimed she had felt this way since Riley was born. Investigators stared at her, unsure whether she was exaggerating, confessing, or trying to explain away the unexplainable. But she didn't stop talking. She described other methods she had considered. She talked about taking a gun out of the home to prevent herself from using it. She talked about the breathing episodes she had caused by covering Riley's mouth with her hand. Episodes doctors had previously assumed were random medical events. But nothing prepared investigators for the final blow, because Irene's last written note didn't only mention Riley, contained 2 names, and the second name belonged to a child who died long before this investigation even began. A child whose death had always been considered a tragedy, a child whose case was closed. The name was Leo, her 2-month-old son, and with that single word, detectives realized the case they thought they were investigating was only half the story. Detectives had walked into the interview room expecting answers about Riley. They walked out realizing they were now standing at the entrance of another case entirely. A case buried 2 years earlier under tragedy, grief, and assumptions. The second name in Irene's written note, Leo, changed everything. Most officers in the room remembered the file. A 2-month-old infant, no signs of trauma, no concerns raised by doctors. A conclusion of SIDS, the kind of heartbreaking but medically accepted explanation that rarely triggers deeper investigations. But now, after hearing Irene's confession about Riley, that conclusion felt like a red flag everyone missed. The moment detectives left the interview room, the atmosphere in the station shifted. Phones rang. Supervisors were alerted. Prosecutors were called in. Within hours, the case of baby Leo Whitehead, long closed, was officially reopened. This wasn't routine procedure. This was rare, almost unheard of. But Irene's own words left no choice. The next move was immediate. A full forensic re-examination of Leo's autopsy reports. When the medical examiner's office pulled the archived records, something became clear right away. Leo's autopsy showed no injuries, no internal trauma, no infections. Nothing that typically triggers suspicion. Infants can die suddenly for many reasons, including illness, undiagnosed conditions, or SIDS. No doctor had questioned it at the time. But what investigators had now, something they didn't have back then, was context. A mother who admitted to suffocating her daughter. A pattern of breathing episodes she later acknowledged causing. A statement implying she'd considered harming her children long before Riley's final night. That changed the lens through which every detail of Leo's file was now examined. The original ruling of SIDS wasn't bulletproof. And with Irene's confession about causing breathing incidents with Riley, investigators now had reason to believe Leo's death needed a second look. Detectives next focused on what Irene had described during her interview. They created a timeline: birth, home life, medical visits, and the night Leo died. Something subtle stood out. Irene had been alone with Leo during his final hours. And just as with Riley, the medical event came only when no one else was present. But the most troubling detail was something else entirely: the consistency. Riley's breathing episodes had followed a predictable pattern, according to medical records. Sudden distress, inability to breathe, resolution once away from her mother. When detectives compared those hospital visits to the notes from paramedics on the night Leo died, the descriptions, though written by different professionals years apart, were disturbingly alike. Short pauses in breathing, a sudden collapse, no obvious trauma, nothing doctors could easily explain. The realization settled slowly, heavily. The pattern may have begun long before Riley was ever born. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Detectives now turned to the people who had been closest to Irene during Leo's brief life. They interviewed family members, neighbors, anyone who had seen the mother and baby in the months leading up to his death. Most remembered Irene as quiet, reserved, exhausted. Like any new mother, nobody recalled signs of abuse. No one suspected danger. But one comment from a relative struck investigators hard. She had allegedly told family during the newborn phase, "I don't feel connected to him." Another recalled Irene saying, "I don't think I'm cut out to do this." These weren't crimes. They weren't admissions. But layered over her later confession, they formed another piece of a puzzle detectives didn't know they were assembling at the time. The deeper they dug, the clearer one uncomfortable truth became. There had been warning signs, small, subtle, easily dismissed, but only obvious now in hindsight. Investigators returned to Irene's electronic data, messages, browser activity, notes, this time looking for anything related to Leo. During the initial investigation into Riley's death, they had focused only on recent activity. But with a new warrant and a new scope, they could now look deeper. When they searched the older backup data on Irene's cloud accounts, they uncovered something they had missed before: a deleted draft message from around the time of Leo's death. Never sent. Barely a sentence. But enough. "I'm scared something is wrong with me." They also found Google searches she made during the newborn period. "Why won't my baby stop crying? I can't sleep, baby won't stop. Feeling disconnected from newborn, is it normal?" All common searches for overwhelmed parents. Nothing criminal. But then the team uncovered one search, dated a week before Leo died, that stopped the entire review cold. How long does it take for a baby to suffocate? The room fell silent. This was no longer a theory, no longer a possibility. It was a pattern linking both children years apart through digital footprints Irene never expected anyone to find. With the reopening of Leo's case and new evidence in hand, detectives requested another interview with Irene. This time, she didn't walk in calm. She looked tired, defeated, like someone who had been thinking constantly since the first interrogation. Detectives began gently, asking about Leo's life, what kind of baby he was, how she felt during those months. Then they shifted. They asked about the searches, about the message draft, about that night. Irene didn't respond right away. Minutes passed in silence. Then she lowered her head and whispered, "I didn't know what else to do." Detectives didn't interrupt. They let her continue. He wouldn't stop crying, couldn't sleep. It felt like it wouldn't end. Her voice cracked, not with grief, but with exhaustion. Then she said something that froze the lead investigator. "I thought, if he went to sleep, it would stop." The room went still. One detective finally asked, "Did you put anything over Leo's face?" Irene swallowed hard. "A blanket." Another pause. Then she added, so quietly it almost wasn't recorded, "I held it there." She didn't elaborate. She didn't clarify. She didn't use the word kill. But she didn't deny it either. And for detectives, that was the moment they realized something they had never anticipated at the start of this investigation. They were not dealing with one homicide. They might be dealing with two. By December 2025, prosecutors began reviewing evidence connecting both cases. Digital searches, statements, medical inconsistencies, patterns in both children's deaths, Irene's own admissions. The case was now fully unified against the accused mother. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Up until that moment, everything detectives had gathered was powerful, but still circumstantial. Irene's statements suggested guilt. Her searches implied intent. Her explanations revealed patterns. But for a prosecutor, nothing matters more than evidence that doesn't rely on interpretation. And the deleted notes and old search history, if authentic, were the closest thing they had to a written record of intent. Moments investigators feared captured the truth behind both children's final minutes. Detectives assembled everything they had into a unified case file. Riley's death, Leo's death, and the behaviors Irene admitted over the years. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Both children died when alone with their mother. Both had unexplained breathing incidents. Both had no injuries visible to medical staff. Both had digital searches associated with suffocation methods. Both had a mother who later admitted causing respiratory distress. What made it worse was Irene's own handwriting. Her notes referenced not only her desire for Riley to be gone, but stated she'd felt this way since Leo. When detectives reread that page, a cold realization set in. If Irene had been struggling with violent impulses since Leo's infancy, then Riley's death wasn't a sudden break. It was the continuation of a long, hidden crisis. A crisis no one around her knew existed. By early December 2025, prosecutors met to determine the charges. Their task wasn't simple. They had to decide, could they charge Irene with Riley's murder? Could Leo's case be reclassified? Was there enough physical evidence, beyond confessions and searches? They started with the strongest case, the one with Irene's direct, unambiguous statements. In her interview, she had said, "I killed her. I held it there. I thought she'd die." Those words alone supported charges for Riley's death. Leo's case was more complicated. No physical trauma, no explicit confession of intent, only a pattern, the confession of her actions, and circumstantial digital evidence. But prosecutors didn't need certainty yet. They needed probable cause. And between Irene's admissions and her searches, they had enough to move forward. On a cold morning in early December 2025, prosecutors filed the following charges. First-degree felony murder for Riley's death. First-degree criminal child abuse. Open murder charge in Leo's case. Pending further review, this was part of the police report/affidavit presented at arraignment, though the formal charging process for Leo is still pending. Filing the charges unified the investigation, allowing authorities to continue building evidence for the second death while keeping Irene in custody. When officers served the warrant, Irene didn't fight. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply stood up, put her hands out, and said, "I knew this was coming." Once booked into the county jail, Irene's behavior puzzled staff. She didn't ask for updates on her surviving child. She didn't request phone calls to family. She didn't express fear or remorse. Instead, she repeatedly asked a single question. "How long will I be here before it's over?" Deputies documented her statements. Mental health staff evaluated her for competency, a standard procedure which found she was coherent, logical, and detached. And that detachment concerned investigators, because it meant she understood everything. While Irene sat in jail awaiting her next hearing, the forensic lab continued digging into her old devices. They found something that had seemed insignificant at first: dozens of deleted notes, short fragments spanning years. Most were mundane grocery lists, reminders, phone numbers. But 7 notes stood out. Short lines like, "I can't do this anymore. I wish I could disappear. They'd be better without me. I don't want them here." Then one line that prosecutors later said tied the entire case together. "The breathing stops when I cover their mouth." It was undated, no name attached, no explanation. But combined with her interviews, the medical timelines, and the deaths of 2 children, It became one of the most damning pieces of the puzzle read into the court record. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Shortly after her arraignment in early December 2025, Irene told guards she wanted to speak to detectives again. Not her lawyer, not a counselor. Detectives arrived unsure what to expect. They sat down. The recorder clicked on. Irene folded her hands and, with a steady voice, said, "I want to explain what happened with Leo." The room froze. She continued, not emotionally, not hesitating, just plainly. She described the night he died, what she did, why she did it, and what she felt. Her final words, which were later included in the court documents, confirmed the escalation of her actions. "I didn't mean to do it the first time, but after that, it got easier." For investigators, it was confirmation. For prosecutors, it was the missing piece to pursue the second homicide charge. The final days of November 2025 were quiet, marking the close of the investigation by the Kent County Sheriff's Office. The investigation concluded with the arrest of Irene Whitehead on Thanksgiving Day. She was formally booked and held without bond, charged with the murder of her 2-year-old daughter, Riley LaVon Hurley Whitehead. The public learned the true scope of the horrific allegations on December 1, 2025, during Irene's arraignment. The courtroom was packed, not just with press, but with community members eager for answers. When Irene was brought into the court, shackled, her demeanor was described by those present as calm and detached. She showed little emotion as the judge read the official charges. The prosecutor then publicly detailed the key findings from the police report and affidavit, revealing the evidence that had been compiled over the preceding 3 months. The prosecutor confirmed that charges were being filed in connection with 2 separate child deaths. Riley LaVon Hurley Whitehead, age 2. Charges: 1 count of felony murder and 1 count of first-degree child abuse. The admission: the prosecutor stated that Irene Whitehead had admitted to suffocating Riley using a plastic bag liner from a trash can. She allegedly told investigators, "I killed her," and detailed the incident. The motive: Irene admitted that her actions were driven by a desire for the child to be gone. Leo, infant son, deceased 2023. Case status: the prosecutor announced that the investigation into the 2023 death of Irene's 7-week-old son, Leo, had been reopened and was ongoing, pending review for further charges. The admission: the prosecutor informed the court that Irene had confessed to killing her infant son as well, detailing the use of a soft object, like a blanket, to cause the suffocation. The pattern: crucially, the prosecution revealed that Irene had stated her pattern of abuse and killing got easier after the first time she suffocated a child. The prosecutor introduced the digital evidence that corroborated the confessions and showed premeditation or intent. Evidence was presented showing that Irene had used her phone to search for ways to kill a child and how to avoid detection. This included searches related to the difficulty of proving suffocation in a toddler. The prosecutor confirmed the existence of a video recorded shortly before Riley's death that showed Irene arguing with one of her older, surviving children. In the video, the child made the harrowing statement, "You never wanted me, you only want me to die. I know you want me to die. Just kill me already." Based on the severity of the charges, the nature of the confessions, and the threat of harm to surviving children, the judge ruled that Irene Whitehead posed an extreme danger to the community. Irene was ordered to be held without bond. Following the arraignment, Irene Whitehead was returned to the county jail, where she is currently being held. The case immediately proceeded to the preliminary examination phase, where the court will determine if there is enough evidence to send the case to trial. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.